I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 79, 1 year from today. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that I love to talk about. I love to talk about all of this, but one of the reasons I love to talk about imagining your naturally thin self is because I used to think it was a load of crap. And now I've seen over and over again how this really changed everything for me and how it makes losing weight so much easier and why you cannot overlook this. So we're going to talk about imagining yourself 1 year from today, being naturally thin. Not because it has to take a year, but we're going to talk about imagining a completely different relationship with food and your body. And all of that can easily happen in a year. It doesn't matter how long you've been dieting. It doesn't matter how long you felt like you've been torturing yourself with counting calories and obsessing and doing all the neurotic things. None of that matters. This is often the most overlooked step. The first episode of the podcast, I actually talked about the most overlooked step to losing weight, which was feeling committed and rather than waiting for motivation all of the time. Which is true, but today I want to expand on the most overlooked step and that commitment and talk about that commitment to imagining your future self, to imagining yourself 1 year from today, thinking about yourself in the future, thinking about yourself with the relationship with your body that you want, with your relationship with food that you want, exactly what it is like for you when you're naturally thin. This isn't create a vision board and hope for the best, right? This isn't a to-do list item to make sure you cross off. I'm going to tell you exactly why this works and how to get started. Before we dive in, if you're loving the podcast and getting a lot out of it, make sure you subscribe so you're always getting the latest episodes. And then take a minute to leave and write a review because when you do, that helps the podcast platform suggest the podcast to other women like you who are looking for all of this help but haven't found it yet. So thank you for taking a minute to do that. You can leave and write a review wherever you listen to the podcast, and it's usually below where the episodes are listed. And I know the women who haven't found the podcast yet say a huge thank you. When I personally used to hear people talk about imagining your future life, imagining yourself getting to the goal, imagining yourself doing it, imagine the things you want, and they'll just come. I used to think, whoa, this is a little too much for me. It was some like airy-fairy woo-woo crap that I was just like, it's a no. I don't get it. I don't like it. Doesn't make any sense. Not happening. Until I had this experience with losing weight. I'm going to share my experience and some other women's experiences who I have helped. And then I'm going to tell you why this works. I think that was what was always missing for me, that I couldn't understand like why it worked. So I never put in the time and the intention to actually do it. And I'm also going to share with you why you cannot lose weight and keep it off without doing this. When I was going through my journey, I got to this place where I started to imagine over and over and over again what it would be like to get up in the morning and feel energized, to love seeing my reflection, to be able to put on anything in my closet and always have it fit, to be able to get out of the shower and see myself naked in the mirror and think, yes, that's me. I imagined getting on the scale and seeing 140 pounds way before I ever got there. I imagine going to a party and leaving the party feeling comfortable in my body while enjoying myself there without feeling deprived, without feeling restricted. I imagined having a few glasses of wine and not thinking about eating a bunch of snacks. I imagined being pregnant and losing the weight easily. I imagined being a thin woman while I was pregnant, meaning, of course, I would put on weight, but I wouldn't put on more than what my body needed. And then I imagined being able to lose it easily. I imagined moving my body and being able to just go for a walk or do some yoga or go to bar classes or whatever I wanted to just because I liked doing it, not because I had to use exercise to keep the weight off. I imagined being in the body I always wanted and having it feel easy. I imagined it just being so innate I didn't have to think about it all of the time. I imagined the freedom of not obsessing in my mind. I imagined the other goals I would be working towards. I imagined the exact life I am living now. Way before I was living it in reality, I kept imagining it in my mind. I imagined it so much so, and not obsessively, by the way, enjoyably. I imagined it so much so that when I saw 140 pounds on the scale, I wasn't jumping up and down with excitement and surprise. I thought, of course it's 140 pounds. I imagined it so much in my brain that my mind literally believed it had already happened. Of course, I was proud of myself that it actually showed up on the scale, but I wasn't like surprised and relieved, right? When we're surprised and relieved, it's because our mind didn't really think it was going to happen. That's why we're surprised or relieved. But when you just think, of course, it was like I stood on the scale and was like, duh, I knew you were going to catch up to where my mind was at. I go to parties now and it's easy for me to enjoy food and leave feeling comfortable. I get in the car afterwards and I think, that was fun. I'm not thinking, oh my God, I overdid it again. Why did I do that? Tomorrow the scale's going to go up and then I'm going to have to exercise. I'm going to have to do this. None of that. I just get to leave with the freedom of like, that was fun. I enjoyed myself. Maybe I had a little something I didn't usually eat, but I still feel comfortable in my body and I know I'm going to wake up feeling comfortable in the morning. I don't drink anymore, but when I did and I was naturally thin, I would have some glasses of wine and I wouldn't even think about snacks. I love exercise because I love moving my body. And all of this happened because of how I imagined my future naturally thin self. A client recently told me, she said, I'm at 141 pounds and her goal is 138. I asked her how she felt about it and she said it felt obvious. She said, of course I'm here. She said, it's inevitable. I reach 138. Like I have zero doubt. I have no worry. It's as good as done. She said, you told me a while ago I would get to this place where I thought, of course, this is just a part of who I am. Of course I'm naturally thin. And now she said, I'm there. She said, I'm not like giddy with excitement and surprise. She said, yes, I'm proud of myself. And yes, I love the progress I've made, but she imagined it over and over and over again. She imagined for her, really specifically, she imagined being in a body that was so comfortable, felt so energizing, felt so good. And she imagined loving that feeling in her body way more than her desire to overeat. So much so that she imagined that desire to feel good in her body, the desire to overeat would pale in comparison. So much so that she would never fear putting weight back on. She imagined that version of herself time and time again, even when the scale went up. And that's the hard part, right? Imagining that version of you even when the scale goes up, even when you do go to a party and overeat. But she imagined that version of herself. She imagined herself being naturally thin, so much so that now she said, I'm living in the body with ease. I'm my naturally thin self in the exact way I imagined. It's now literally my reality. I'm living the exact life I wanted. This is so powerful, and here is why it works. What happens when you imagine your future is your brain doesn't actually know it isn't totally real right now. Yes, you intellectually know that, but there's also a part of your brain that doesn't know that. The more you imagine your future self 1 year from today being naturally thin with ease, the more then you today, your current self, starts to identify as your naturally thin future self. The more your mind then has a focal point of that naturally thin version of you, then the more and more it will go to work to bridge the gap between how you think and feel and act today with how you think and feel and act when you are naturally thin. When you give your brain something to focus on, it will go to work to create that. So if you're focusing on your past and how hard it's been and how it's always a struggle and how you're never going to get there, that's what your brain is focusing on, and that's what it will create more and more and more of. So you have to diligently take your brain to the place where you are naturally thin, where it is easy, where you love being in your own body. When you are so clear on what your naturally thin self for you, right? I talked about the client that loved being in her body and it just felt so much better than any desire to overeat, right? And I shared some of my desires for my naturally thin self. You want to know exactly what those are for you. When you identify yourself for you, your naturally thin version of you, how she thinks, how she feels, how she dresses, how she shows up, what her action looks like, what her inaction look like. How does she eat at a party? How does she eat at a restaurant? How does she eat on vacation? How does she show up with her kids when she's not obsessing about the exercise and the weight loss? How is she at work when she feels so confident in her own body, right? All of it. Then, when you get so crystal clear on that future version of you, then what happens tonight when you're sitting at dinner and you ask your naturally thin self with all of this vividness in your mind, you ask your naturally thin self, hey, naturally thin self, at dinner tonight, like this evening, right? Not in the future, like in a couple hours from now, you at dinner, you're with your family, you will actually start to tap into how your future self thinks and feels and acts at dinner with your family tonight. And so maybe you don't eat exactly like her, but you start to eat more like her. You start to develop some of her ease. And then, rather than thinking, oh, I have to give something up. Is this 1 cup of rice? I need to eat less calories. Instead of all that crap, you're thinking, oh, I'm getting closer to naturally thin me. It's way more fun when you're imagining your naturally thin self and you're seeing how you're becoming more and more of her, than when you're focusing on what you're gaining in that way, which is your naturally thin life with ease, instead of focusing on what you think you need to give up. And then let's say you're doing this, you have such a clear image of what your naturally thin self is like, right? And it may change a little bit over time, right? But you just right now today, you can really imagine her. Then let's say you overeat. But when you imagine your naturally thin self over and over and over again, you spend way less time thinking, it's never going to happen. I'm never going to get there. I should just give up. Screw this. It's too hard. You spend way less time in that headspace because you've imagined her so vividly, it starts to feel more and more possible. You start to feel more and more like her. So instead then, when you overeat, telling yourself, well, screw this. I'm just going to keep going. I'll wait till Monday to start again. Instead, you think, okay, what would naturally thin me do? Naturally thin me probably does still overeat sometimes. Remember, yourself, 1 year from today, being naturally thin with ease, she's not a unicorn. She's still a human. So if she does overeat, right, albeit less frequently and probably with less food, then what does she do? Okay, she doesn't beat herself up. She doesn't say, it doesn't matter, so I'll keep eating. She doesn't say, I'm going to go on a super strict diet and restrict and obsess and then overdo it on the other side. She doesn't do any of that because she's already naturally thin. She already identifies as that person. So instead, she might think, okay, well, I overate a little bit, but I'm going to stop eating now. And I'm going to let my body digest this food. I'm going to wait until I'm hungry again before I eat. I want to get back to that light, airy, energized feeling in my body. There's always another meal. I don't need to eat more right now. And I know eating more food just isn't going to have me feel the way I want to feel in my body. Then maybe she wakes up in the morning and the scale went up 2 pounds. She doesn't freak out because she really is like, no, I'm just naturally thin. Maybe she drinks more water. Maybe she then just has some fruit when she's hungry to give her body a digestive break. And then when she's at her hunger level of, say, an 8, on a scale of 1 to 10, she says to herself, you know, I don't feel quite as energized and light and airy as I want to feel. So maybe rather than having the wrap for lunch today, I'm just going to have some soup instead. No biggie. I'll just have the wrap tomorrow. And she goes through her day like that. And maybe she even thinks, I'll go for a walk when I get home. I don't want to do yoga. A walk really helps my body feel better. Maybe rather than telling herself, oh my God, I overate last night, I need to get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning to work it off, she actually sleeps to let her body work through the food. And then she's like, I'll just maybe go for a walk in the evening because I just love the way walking feels. Then imagine when you're so vivid and you're so clear on your naturally thin self, maybe you are going to a party and you imagine your naturally thin self going. And instead of worrying about feeling out of control and having a few glasses of wine and saying, screw it, I don't care, I'm going to eat all the food and feel terrible afterwards and I'll just start again on Monday. Instead of all of that, you think, okay, when I'm naturally thin, maybe I go to a party not being ravenous. I used to go to holiday parties, having had worked out intensely, saving up all my quote unquote calories for the day so I could splurge in the evening. And I would eat so much because I was so hungry and I told myself I have permission to eat whatever I want. I would leave so uncomfortable, right? I was like, I'm pretty sure naturally thin me doesn't do that, right? So maybe naturally thin you thinks about going to a party and she thinks, I'm going to go and I'll be a little hungry and I'm going to talk to some people and I'll get a drink. And I know I want to leave the party feeling really comfortable. So rather than eating to the point of feeling uncomfortable, I decide I really want a cupcake. Naturally thin me, maybe she loves cupcakes too. So instead of eating a bunch of appetizers and a full meal and then 3 cupcakes, rather than doing that, because naturally thin me knows she wants to leave the party still feeling comfortable, still feeling like the party was enjoyable, and still feeling really good in her body. Instead, I say, okay, naturally thin me maybe has a little fruit, maybe she gets a drink, and then she has a side dish or two, and then she has a cupcake and she loves it and she enjoys it and it's amazing and she moves on. And then maybe she has another drink and she talks to people for a little bit longer and then she leaves and she drives home feeling incredible in her body. Maybe that's what naturally thin me does. Naturally thin me, she's so proud that she just went to a party, had a few drinks, ate a cupcake and still feels good. Now, maybe I don't feel quite as light and airy as after a salad or some soup or a smoothie, but I just went to a party, had a couple of drinks, had a couple bites of snacks, maybe had a few things of this and that, had a cupcake, enjoyed myself, and I'm feeling quite great. And I get to wake up in the morning as naturally thin me, still feeling good, and the scale is the same as yesterday. Did you know that's possible, by the way? You can go to a party, have a couple of drinks, have a cupcake, and the scale could be the same as yesterday. Really, truly, that's possible. But here's the thing. You don't see this as a possibility when you aren't imagining your future self 1 year from today, being naturally thin and doing all of this and starting to think and feel and act like her. Because when you imagine her so vividly in the way I just described, going to the party, and then you actually go, you think that way, you feel those feelings, you show up in that way, you eat in that way, you leave feeling great, you wake up in the morning and you see the scale is the same as it was the day before, and you literally just blow your mind. You're like, what? I could totally do this forever. This could be way easier than I ever thought. You don't even give yourself the possibility to experience that when you don't imagine your naturally thin self. When you skip this, you rob yourself of this possibility of being naturally thin with ease because you see so much of your decisions, you see so many of your choices as either ors. I have to give this up to lose weight. I have to restrict to lose weight because your brain is so past focused. But naturally thin you 1 year from today, she doesn't see it that way. So not only do you get the benefit of enjoying the imagination of your naturally thin self, but you get to show yourself how it can be easier than you ever thought. But not if you keep imagining your past self that has been struggling. That will always perpetuate the struggle. Notice the difference between the woman who imagines her naturally thin self over and over and over again and how she actually becomes more and more of her every day. and what you typically do, what your brain is used to, which is probably thinking about the past and dragging that past into your future. My guess is that isn't working. And I've said before, your past self doesn't know how to be naturally thin in the way you want for yourself a year from now. If she did, you would have done it already. None of us are just sitting there knowing exactly how to be our future self and not doing it, right? So if you're thinking about your past over and over and over again, that's what's going to be what ends up in your future. So you have to teach your brain how to imagine your naturally thin self. The woman who imagines her naturally thin self, she starts to identify as that woman now. And then so much so, when you really imagine your naturally thin self, you start to actually think and feel and act like her now, like tonight, right now, at dinner. Remember, the way you think, the sentences in your mind, those thoughts create your feelings. When you have a sentence in your brain, a thought, you have a neural connection that is made. And it sends a signal to another part of your brain that releases peptides into your body, feelings, and all of the action you take comes from your feelings. As humans, we cannot take action without an emotion. Feelings and emotions I use interchangeably. It's how we are designed. All action and inaction starts with a feeling. It starts with an emotion. Always, 100% of the time. You always have a feeling and emotion in your body, always. And it's always what's driving your action. Even willpower starts with a feeling. Usually the feeling, the emotion of pressure. It's just not sustainable. So if all of your action and inaction, all of your behavior starts with a feeling that is created from a thought, the more then you identify and you think the way your naturally thin self thinks 1 year from today, the more you start to think and then you feel and then you act like her. And as you do this more and more, the more it becomes automatic. The more you're just like, of course, this is me. And the number on the scale will then actually reflect it. The downfall most of you have in doing this is that you think that it will just click in one day when the scale changes, right? You just think, oh, well, when I get to a certain number on the scale, then I'll think and I'll feel and I'll act the way I would when I'm naturally thin. But all of that is backwards. If it worked that way, none of us would ever put weight back on, right? If we got to a certain number on the scale and then all of a sudden it just clicked, right? None of us would ever lose weight and then put it back on because it would have clicked. You have to imagine and teach your brain how to think and feel and act the way your naturally thin self does now. So much so that your brain is so practiced at thinking it, it literally feels like it is a part of you. This is how it becomes easy and innate. There is a correlation between you imagining your naturally thin future self and closing that gap between her and you today, you doing that now, and the ease at which you lose weight and keep it off. Think about something else you've accomplished in your life. Let's say going to college. Pick something that's like a no-brainer, like you always knew you were going to do it. Growing up, in my household that I grew up in, we talked about going to college, what it would be like, how much fun I would have, how important it was for my career, why I would want to go, the money involved in going, saving up for going, right? How I might miss home, but love meeting new friends and the freedom. I didn't actually miss home, by the way. I don't think I imagined that much as part of my vision of going. No, we imagine things like that so much that when I graduated, I wasn't like, wow, no way, never thought I would do this. Yes, I was proud of myself, but I thought of myself as a college graduate way before I had the proof, way before I had the diploma. So then when I had the actual result of being a college graduate, right, I didn't have that result at all until one day I just did, right? Kind of same with the number on the scale. You don't have the result of your goal weight until one day you do. But when I actually had that diploma, when I was technically a college graduate, I wasn't shocked and surprised. I just thought, of course I am. It's the same with being naturally thin. We do this so well as children, imagining our future. having it become so clear of what we want, and then some point we stop. But it is the way to the future you want. So, how committed are you to imagining your naturally thin self? You should be able to imagine her so well it's crystal clear in your mind. The more you imagine her, the more and more you start to literally become her. When you imagine her, you see the possibility of being in a body you love with ease, in a way that your brain now catches up to that imagination, in a way that it feels like, yes, I'm just home. This is just who I am. And then that is the reality you live in. And then that is what you get to carry with you into the rest of your life. Here's the last thing I want to say about this. When you imagine your naturally thin self right now today, you get to enjoy that vision right now. You get to experience how she thinks and how she feels in this moment. So not only is it how you get to the result of being naturally thin, but you get to enjoy it right now too. You don't have to wait. So I want you to really get clear on what that looks like for you, right? And then ask that naturally thin version of you, how do I get a little bit closer? How do I get there? Is there help that I need? What do I want to change? What do I want to do differently, right? She has so much more wisdom, that naturally thin version of you, than you give her credit for. And because you can imagine it, your brain actually believes it's possible. I had another client email me this that I wanted to share with all of you as part of imagining your naturally thin self and really seeing that it is possible for you. She said this. I just wanted to share this with you real quick. This is what she said. This is the start of her message. She said, I was at a potluck and I decided I was done and didn't want a cookie I'd taken, so I saved it for later. I got some coffee to go and left on a long drive. I put the cookie wrapped up on the seat next to me and I forgot about it. She said it in all caps. I forgot about it. I forgot about the cookie for real for an hour drive. She said, my number one goal here in Naturally Thin for Life was to stop obsessing even more than the weight. Thank you for helping me do what no other program could. That's all. See you soon. It is possible for you to not only reach your goal weight, but to have the mental freedom of that naturally thin version of you who doesn't obsess, who lives her life with ease, who doesn't worry about her weight. All of that is possible for you. The more you imagine it, the more you will actually start to live it. So what are you waiting for? Come join us in Naturally Thin for Life, where you will become so crystal clear on your naturally thin self. And when you can see the path there, it makes imagining your future self that much easier. The 5 steps I teach you in the Naturally Thin for Life program will show you how to become and tap into the naturally thin version of you that you want to be. It is the fastest way to get there. It is also the only program where you either lose the weight or you get your money back. Because I know that once you get your brain on board with your body's desire to feel light and energized and comfortable, once you get really clear on that naturally thin version of you, and you've harnessed the most powerful tool you have, your own brain, nothing can get in your way. It makes learning how to listen to your hunger. It makes learning how to listen to your satiated levels. It makes learning how to know what food feels really good in your body. It makes learning how to evaluate all of that so much easier. Listen to the outro to learn how to join, and I cannot wait to see you there. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.